Good evening to all the participants today. In our continuing series of lectures, today we have a very eminent jurist and a senior advocate, practicing senior advocate of the Supreme Court, Justice Nagamuthu, who, after spending more than a decade as a judge of the Madras High Court, has made a seamless transition as a senior advocate of the Supreme Court. So we have requested him today to speak on a subject of his choice, and the subject matter, as you would have seen, is a very intriguing one. The subject is of relevance to many of us, lawyers as well as students and non-lawyers. And Justice Nagamuthu would be focusing on the various aspects of police powers, because we normally associate police powers with only the uniformed police. But there are various other facets to investigation and prosecution. And Justice Nagamuthu's talk today would be focused on those aspects of investigation and prosecution, which we are not really conversant about. So without much ado, this is a very interesting and unusual topic. I would now request Justice Nagamuthu to commence his lecture. Welcome, sir. And just one moment, I would also request all the participants to please mute your screens and also switch off the video. And this session would be followed by a Q&A session. Those who are interested in raising questions may please post it in the chat box, and Abhimanyu will take on the questions and post it to Justice Nagamuthu for his answers. Thank you very much. Welcome, Justice Nagamuthu.
Yes. Good evening to all my friends. It is my pleasure to be with you and to spend my time very valuably. At the outset, I should thank the organizers of this group for having invited me to be a part of this webinar. I am told that you have conducted so many webinars already. And I am also very hopeful that, as it used to be, this webinar would also be very much helpful to our participants. Today's topic, as you would have seen, is the police proper and the police deemed. Before going into this classification of the officers, let us first see as to how the police officers are dealt with in various enactments. What are their powers, functions, and duties? See, the Indian Police Act came into being in the year 1861. As you could see in the preamble of the said act, it is an act to reorganize the police and to make it a more efficient instrument for the prevention and detention of crime. So please mark these two terms: efficient instrument for the prevention and detection of crimes. With this avowed object, the Indian Police Act was brought into force by British in the year 1861, hardly within 4 years after the first Sepoy Mutiny in the year 1857. If you look at the provisions of this act, there is an attempt made to define as to who is a police. Section 1 of the act defines the police, which shall include all persons who shall be enrolled under this act. Therefore, every one officer who is enrolled under the Police Act are all police officers, undoubtedly. Now, when you thereafter, after about 10 years gap, the Indian Evidence Act came into being. Section 25 of the Indian Evidence Act states that no confession made to a police officer shall be proved against him. As you all know, Section 26 and 27 are provisos to Section 25 of the Evidence Act. Having said that no confession made to a police officer shall be proved against him, there was no definition of the term police given in the Act. To my knowledge, there is no other enactment wherein also we can lay our hands to find any definition for this term police, except the one small definition found in Section 1 of the Police Act. The Code of Criminal Procedure speaks of the powers and duties of the police officers again. Even CRPC does not define the term police or the police officers. Section 2O of the code defines the term officer in charge of a police station, and that also does not define as to who is a police officer. Section 2H of the code defines as to what the term investigation means. It says investigate includes all proceedings under this Act for a collection of evidence. Under the Police Act, if you look at Section 20, it speaks of the authority to be exercised by the police. This says, police officers enrolled under this Act shall not exercise any authority except the authority provided for a police officer under this Act and any act which shall hereafter be passed for regulating criminal procedure. Therefore, this gives an indication that the power of a police officer to arrest, investigate, to file charge sheet, all emanate from the Indian Police Act as well as from the Code of Criminal Procedure. Section 23 speaks of duties of police officers. I am referring to Police Act. Besides, it shall be the duty of every police officer promptly to obey and execute all orders, etc., do the investigation. So these are all the general powers of the police. When we turn to the Code of Criminal Procedure, Section 154 of the Code mandates that an officer in charge of a police station is duty bound to register a case when any information is laid before him, making out a cognizable offence. We all know about the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in Lalita Kumari, wherein a constitutional bench has said that the police officer has got no option but to register a case, and he has got no option even to hold a preliminary inquiry before registering a case, except in certain specified cases which have been carved out as exceptions in the very judgment itself. So as per this judgment, every police officer in charge of a police station is bound to register a case without even verifying whether the information is credible, trustworthy, or believable. It is enough if the information makes out one or more cognizable offences, then it is for him to register the case. This is what Section 154 says. I do not want to, I am just giving only bird's eye view of the various provisions before going to that classification. Now, 155 of the code speaks of non-cognizable offences, where the police officer has to refer the party to the court or he has to seek permission. Only with the permission of the court he can commence investigation. Section 156 gives power to the police to investigate, which shall culminate in a final report under Section 173(2) of the Code to enable the magistrate having jurisdiction to take cognizance of the offences which are reported in the said final report. Now, it is also well settled. It is also too well settled that section registering a case under Section 154 does not amount to investigation or does not form part of investigation. The actual investigation commences after the registration of the case, that is from 156 onwards. And similarly, the final report known as challan or charge sheet is laid under Section 173(2) of the Code after the investigation is completed. Therefore, it is also too well settled that a final report filed under Section 173(2) of the Code does not form part of investigation. Therefore, as held in various judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court, and as plainly we could understand from Chapter 12 of the Code, the investigation commences after the registration of the case that is from 156 onwards, and it ends before the final report is filed under section 173(2). In other words, I want to make it very clear that registration of the case under 154 CRPC does not amount to investigation, and it does not form part of investigation at all. Please keep this in your mind first. And similarly, filing final report under section 173(2) of the code also does not form part of the investigation, because such a final report is filed after the investigation is completed. Therefore, that is also not forming part of the investigation. These two things you please kindly fondly present, keep in your mind, because this is going to have some vital importance during our discussion. Now, turning to the classification now. Who are the officers who are empowered to investigate? I have already told you that the power to investigate to a police officer is vested by the Code of Criminal Procedure as well as the Indian Police Act. The power to investigate commences from section 156 and ends with 172 of the code. This area, please always keep in your mind, because this is going to be very important for our further discussion today. Now, apart from an officer in charge of a police station who has been empowered under section 156 of the code to investigate both cognizable as well as non-cognizable cases, under section 36 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, an officer superior in rank than that of the officer in charge of the police station can also exercise all the powers of an officer in charge of the police station to investigate. That is how the superior officers also do investigation. It is also too well settled for a police station there can be only one officer in charge at a time, and all the officers who are above to his rank can also investigate. This is as per section 36 of the Evidence Act, of the code. Now, come to the classification. The officers appointed as police officers as per the provisions of the Indian Police Act or any other enactment like state enactment. For example, in Tamil Nadu, we have Tamil Nadu District Police Act and Tamil Nadu City Police Act like that. So, these officers are police officers proper. They do the investigation as per the provisions of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Suppose some more powers are conferred on them by any special enactment, very well they can exercise that also. Now, these officers who are police officers proper or one class of officers, let us say that they form part of the first class. Okay. Now, there are some officers who are not appointed as police officers in terms of the Indian Police Act or in terms of any other local law, but they are officers exercising either all the powers or some of the powers of a police officer investigating a case. This is one class. There are also yet another class of officers who are not strictly police officers by their appointment, but they are deemed to be police officers. They are deemed to be police officers as per a deeming provision in an act in which these people are empowered. So this is yet another class. There is one more class of officers. Those officers are not really police officers appointed as per Indian Police Act or any other police act, but they exercise similar powers, but not exact police powers, similar powers. For example, a police officer has got power to enter, search, and arrest. Similar powers are conferred on various other officers also, though they are not doing any investigation. They are the last class of officers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 classes I will now say. How does it make difference in the matter of investigation, or how does it make difference in the matter of trial of the offences which are prosecuted by these officers before various courts is the main area where we have to concentrate. Now let us take the case of CBI. As per section 2(3) of the Delhi Police Act. So let us first take a quick view of the Delhi Police Establishment Act. 1 second, please. I will take the act. I'm sorry, it's not available. Okay. Section 2(3) of the Act says that any member of the said police establishment of or above the rank of the sub-inspector shall be deemed to be an officer in charge of a police station. So, any officer of and above the rank of a sub-inspector of police, sub-inspector appointed in the CBI department, appointed under the Delhi Police Establishment Act, is deemed to be an officer in charge of a police station. And subsection 2 states that in respect of investigation and arrest of persons, he shall have all the powers, duties, and liabilities of a police officer. Therefore, an officer of CBI is not strictly a police officer, but he is deemed to be a police officer, exercising all the powers of an ordinary police officer, and he also exercises the powers of an officer in charge of a police station. So this is one classic example as to where a statute by means of a deeming clause, deeming provision, creates a fiction that an officer, though not basically a police officer, is deemed to be a police officer, exercising all the powers of a police officer. Therefore, an officer of CBI, of and above the rank of sub-inspector, who exercises all the powers of a police officer, ordinary police officer, and who exercises all the powers of an officer in charge of a police station, can do investigation like any other police officer who does it under the provisions of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So virtually, though technically there is a difference between a CBI officer and the ordinary police officer, so far as powers are concerned, they exercise the same powers. Therefore, the CBI officer has to register a case under section 154 CRPC, and he has to commence his investigation as per section 156, and finally on completing the investigation, he has to lay a charge sheet, namely challan, before the court having jurisdiction under section 173(2) of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So far as CBI people are concerned, they got no difficulty because the statements recorded by them squarely fall under section 161 CRPC, and therefore they can be used only for the limited purposes as stated in section 162 of the code. I want to remind our younger friends that any statement recorded under section 161 CRPC could be used only for one purpose, not for any other purpose. You see the language of the code. No statement recorded under section 161 shall be used for any purpose. This is the language, it's a negative language. The statement cannot be used for any purpose, except for the purpose of contradicting the maker of the statement, provided he is examined as a prosecution witness in a trial of the same offense. There are two exceptions. Those exceptions are statement falling under section 32 of the Evidence Act as a Daily Declaration, and a statement falling under section 27 of the Evidence Act, that is a fact discovered out of any information furnished by the accused. These are the two exceptions. So therefore, so far as CBI officers are concerned, they register a case under 154 CRPC. That FIR can be used both for corroboration as well as for contradiction. Because it is not a statement recorded during investigation, it has come before before the investigation had commenced. Statement recorded under 161 can be used only for contradiction. We can do all the other matters. We are not concerned with those things for today's discussion. Finally, he is empowered to file a final report under section 173(2) before the jurisdictional magistrate, who is empowered to take cognizance of the offences. So far as CBI people are concerned, we have got no difficulty. Where practically we see that the statements are not admitted in evidence. We follow the mandate of section 162. And similarly, the confession made to a CBI officer is also not admitted because of the bar contained in section 25 of the Evidence Act. So this is one class of officers. Now let us move on to the NIA, National Investigating Agency. Let me read some of the provisions of that act. See, the objections and reasons of this act says an act to consolidate or constitute an investigation agency at the national level to investigate and prosecute offences affecting the sovereignty, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, this is an organization constituted for the purpose of investigation and prosecution. So these are the two powers. There is no power given to them to prevent the crime as it could be seen from the objects and reasons. I read the Police Act, which says that the purpose of the police under the Police Act, as it could be seen in the preamble, is to reorganize the police and to make it a more efficient instrument for the prevention and detection of crime. Whereas this NIA is for not for prevention, as it could be seen, it is for investigation and for prosecution. So let us not give much weightage for this. Maybe it is some small omission on the part of the one who drafted the act. Let us move on to section 3.
Ready?
Notwithstanding section 3 of the NIA Act. Section 3. Notwithstanding anything in the Police Act, the central government may constitute a special agency to be called the National Investigating Agency for investigation and prosecution of offences under the Act specified in the schedule. Subsection 2. Subject to any orders which the central government may make in this behalf, officers of the agency shall have throughout India in relation to the investigation of scheduled offences and arrest of persons concerned in such offences, all the powers, duties, please mark these words, all the powers, duties, privileges and liabilities which police officers have in connection with the investigation of offences committed by them. So they enjoy all the powers of a police officer who is a real police officer in strict sense as defined in the Indian Police Act. So all the power, duties, privileges and liabilities which police officers have in connection with the investigation of the offences committed therein. Any officer of the agency, I'm reading subsection 3, any officer of the agency of or above the rank of sub-inspector may, subject to any order which the central government may make in this behalf, exercise throughout India any of the powers of the officer in charge of the police station in the area in which he is present. Now, in this act, two things are very important to be noted. Number one, as per subsection 2, these officers who are in the NIA have been vested with all the powers of an ordinary police officer. Apart from that, more specifically, he has been vested with all the powers of an officer in charge of a police station. Therefore, so far these officers are concerned, they also do investigation as per the Code of Criminal Procedure. So they have to register FIR, they have to investigate the case commencing from 156, they have to record the statements under 161, then all the other formalities. Finally, they can file a police report under section 173(2). But in this act, we do not find any provision which says that these police officers are deemed as police officers. Whereas in the Delhi Police Establishment Act, we found a specific provision which says that officers are deemed to be police officers. But here, there is no such deeming provision, so as to say that they are also by fiction police officers. But here, these officers do not either police officers real or police officers deemed. They are police officers exercising all the powers of the police officer. So all the restrictions, all the privileges, all the rights conferred on a police officer under the Code of Criminal Procedure are applicable. Here also, there can be no doubt that a statement recorded by him is hit by section 162, and similarly, a confession of the accused is hit by section 25 of the Evidence Act. So far as this act is concerned, we have got no difficulty in understanding. But only one thing what you have to notice, that there is no deeming provision. Therefore, they are not deemed to be police officers, though they enjoy all the powers of a police officer. Now let us move on to yet another act. So I am giving one act as an illustration to explain as to how these officers have been classified. This act is Railway Properties Unlawful Possession Act. We call it as RPUP Act. Under this act, a force is created. I will read the objects and reasons. An act to consolidate and amend the law relating to unlawful possession of railway property. For this purpose, the earlier act was repealed. Under the earlier act which was repealed, the investigation had to be done only by a police officer. But in this act, some powers have been given to a member of this force. What are those powers? We will see that. Now, turning to section 6, it says, any superior officer or member of the police force. Force means an officer appointed under this act, under the Railway Protection Force Act. Any superior officer or member of the force may, without an order from a magistrate and without a warrant, arrest any person who has been concerned in an offence punishable under this act, or against whom a reasonable suspicion exists of his having been so concerned. Here, power of arrest has been given. Similar power of arrest is enjoyed by police under section 41 and 42 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So similar provision is made in this act, and such powers are conferred on the officers of this force. This is what section 6 indicates. Now let us move on to section 7. Disposal of persons arrested. Every person arrested for an offence punishable under this act shall, if the arrest was made by a person other than an officer of the force, be forwarded without delay to the nearest officer of the force, not to the police, to the force. Now, section 8. When an officer of the force receives information about the commission of an offence punishable under this act, or when any person is arrested by an officer of the force for an offence punishable under this act, or is forwarded to him under section 7, he shall proceed to inquire into the charge against such person. Please kindly mark these words. The officer of the force shall proceed to inquire. Section 156 of the code says that a police officer shall proceed to investigate. Here, the act clearly says that the officer shall proceed to inquire, not enquire. Inquiry, you know, I do not want to elaborate it more. Inquiry and the enquiry, they make all the difference. So here an officer shall proceed to inquire into the charge against that person. And this is what section 8.2 says. There is no provision here, either saying that an officer under this act shall be deemed to be a police officer so that he could engage, exercise only powers of a police officer. There is no such provision. There is no such deeming provision. Similarly, this act nowhere indicates that this officer under this act shall exercise the powers of the police officer. Nowhere it is stated. Similarly, as we found in the Delhi Police Establishment Act, the NI Act, we found a provision stating that an officer of that department shall exercise all the powers of an officer in charge of a police station. That is why I said that such an officer under the Delhi Police Establishment Act and the NIA shall file a final report on completing the investigation. But here, there is no such provision also giving powers of investigation. This act states only that the officer shall inquire into the charges. Therefore, there is no investigation at all under this RPUP Act. These officers, as I already told you, form a different class, a separate class. They are all officers, not police officers, not deemed police officers, not empowered officers to exercise all the powers of a police or some of the powers of a police officer. They are officers exercising some of the powers which are similar powers exercised by the police. So, like power of arrest, power of inquiry, to record a statement, etc. They do not have the power to investigate. They do not have power, therefore, to file any final report before the court. As per the Act, the officer after holding such an inquiry has to file only a complaint, which is otherwise in common parlance known as private complaint, before the competent court to enable the court to take cognizance. This is the way he has to do. This is another class of officers. Now, let us move on to the Money Laundering Act, which is a very recent act. See, what is the purpose of this act? Whereas the political declaration, an act to prevent money laundering, laundering, and to provide for confiscation of property derived from or involved in money laundering, and for matters connected therewith. This is the objects and reasons stated. Now, let us go to section 2NA, 2 subsection NA of the Act. Say, investigation. Investigation includes all the proceedings under this Act conducted by the director or by an authority authorized by the central government under this Act for the collection of evidence. So every proceeding which is conducted by the director or by an authority authorized by the central government under this Act, he is doing investigation. So he is not holding any inquiry. This area remains even today with a little confusion. Now, you know that before the courts, where these people under these officers under this Act file private complaint, the statements recorded by them, to my knowledge, are admitted, holding that the bar under section 162 CRPC is not applicable. And similarly, any statement amounting to confession made by an accused to such an officer is also admitted in courts. When this is an investigation, so we found the definition in the code as to what is investigation. that is 2H. You can to see the definition which is in pari material. 2H. Investigation includes all the proceedings under this code for the collection of evidence conducted by a police officer. This is what section 2H of the code speaks about, a police officer's investigation. Now here, any proceeding, all the proceedings under this act, under the Money Laundering Act, conducted by the director or by an authority authorized by the central government under this act for the collection of evidence, this is investigation. So whatever is done by an officer under this act is an investigation. When it is an investigation, would that statement fall under section 161 so as to be regulated by section 162 of the code, or whether the confession made by an accused to such an officer during the course of investigation or even before the investigation, because section 25 of the Evidence Act, you know very well, does not bar only the statements which are made, confessions which are made during the course of investigation. Section 25 is so wide enough, which will include any confession made to any police officer. One need not be an investigating officer. He need not be an Indian police officer even. He can be an American police officer. If a confession is made to him, then it is not admissible. That is a complete bar under the Act. Now, here, if an officer under the Money Laundering Act is a police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act, then the statement, the confession made by him is inadmissible. Therefore, the question is whether an officer under the Money Laundering Act is a police officer for the purposes of section 25 of the Evidence Act and section 162 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Admittedly and undoubtedly, they are not police officers strictly, because they have not been enlisted in the force as per the Indian Police Act. No doubt about that. They have not been declared as deemed police officers by any deeming provision in the Act. They enjoy certain powers of the police. As we could see in the RPUP Act, they enjoy similar powers of the police, but they do not investigate, they only hold inquiry. But here in this Act, these officers do investigation and they do not hold any inquiry or inquiry. They do investigation. So the question is, during the course of investigation, when they are enjoying all the powers, like that of a police officer, whether the statement recorded by them could be hit by section 25 of the Evidence Act or by section 162 of the Code. This question is to be further explored by us now. Now let us move on to the Money Laundering Act. I'm sorry, this is NDPS Act. We'll go to the NDPS Act now. Now, NDPS Act, section 53, power to invest officers of certain departments with powers of an officer in charge of a police station. The central government, after consultation with the state government, may by notification published in the official gazette, invest any officer of the Department of Central Excise, Narcotics, Customs, Revenue Intelligence, or any other department of the central government, including paramilitary forces or armed forces, or any class of such officers, with the powers of an officer in charge of a police station for investigation of the offences under this Act. So, section 53 very clearly states that an officer of these departments who have been invested with such powers of an officer in charge of a police station by means of notification issued by the central government do investigation. This Act cannot be stated to be a complete code covering all the areas. I am sure of that. Therefore, they exercise the powers of a police officer flowing from the Code of Criminal Procedure, so long as such provision is not contrary to the specific provisions of this Act. Now let us move to Section 53A of the Act. Now I was telling you that if a statement recorded under Section 1, if a statement recorded by an officer falls within the ambit of Section 161, it is hit by Section 162, which could be used only for certain purposes like contradiction, etc. I've already explained to you. Now, having said in Section 53 that an officer of these departments, specifically empowered, exercises all the powers of an officer in charge of a police station, Section 53A says that such statements are admissible in evidence. This is contrary to Section 162 of the Code. As we have already pointed out, Section 162 of the Code, I'm sorry for repeating because it's very important, therefore I'm repeating. 162 states that no statement recorded or reduced into writing under Section 161 CRPC shall be used for any purpose except for the purpose of contradiction. But Section 53A is slightly a deviation from Section 162 of the Code. Let me read 53A first. A statement made and signed by a person before any officer empowered under Section 53. Therefore, this gives an indication that a statement to be made by a person during the course of investigation requires to be signed by him. Whereas under Section 161, the police officer shall not obtain the signature of the maker of the statement. This is one conflict, and therefore, this being a special enactment will prevail over the Code of Criminal Procedure. There is no difficulty in understanding this proposition that an officer investigating a case can get the signature of the witness in his statement. Now, moving further. During the course of any inquiry or proceedings by such officer shall be relevant for the purpose of proving in any prosecution for an offence under this Act. Now, under Section 162, the statement is not relevant. It cannot be admitted in evidence. It can be used only for contradiction. But this provision says that it is relevant, which means it can be admitted in evidence. This is also a slight conflict from Section 162. This being, as usual, as a special provision, will prevail over Section 162 bar. No difficulty in understanding this also. The further part of this section also is important to know. In any prosecution for an offence under this Act, the truth of the facts which it contains, when the person who made the statement is dead, or cannot be found, or is incapable of giving evidence, or is kept out of the way of the adverse party, or when the person who made the statement is examined as a witness in the case before the court, and the court is of the opinion that having regard to the circumstances of the case, the statement should be admitted in the evidence in the interest of justice. You just see here. So it is not automatic that a statement recorded by an officer investigating the case on Section 53 is admissible, is relevant. It says only in certain circumstances, such as when the person is dead or unable, he is not found, etc., the statement could be admitted in evidence. This is the only deviation made from Section 162. But the subsection 1B gives a discretion to the court, even though the person is alive, even though he is examined, the statement could also be still admitted. That means, if the court so deems fit, it is not automatic. There is a small amount of discretion on the part of the court to admit the statement. This is a complete deviation from 162. So 162 of the Code prohibits the statement being admitted in evidence. It declares the same as irrelevant, whereas this Act says that such a statement is admissible at the discretion of the court in certain circumstances. So this is what Section 53A says. If you closely look at Section 53A, it does not declare that a statement made by an accused to such an officer is relevant or admissible, notwithstanding anything contained in Section 25 of the Evidence Act. Therefore, so far as the statement of an accused which amounts to confession is concerned, Section 25 bar is still there, Section 53A. Now let us move on to Section 67. What is happening now? How we have confused ourselves. This act came into being in the year 1985. The law is not clear. Even today, it is so fluid. The Honorable Supreme Court takes a different views at different points of time, and there is no certainty. You all know that certainty is a hallmark of law, and unless the law is certain, it will be very difficult for the people to follow. Now, there is no certainty so far as this part of the act is concerned. The issue is whether a statement of an accused made to an officer of DRI, which is a confession, is admissible. In other words, whether he is an officer for the purpose of Section 25 and whether the statement is hid by the same. My humble view is that having read Section 53 and 53A together, we can deduce that he is a police officer because he is doing investigation. And though the statement recorded by him is not hit by Section 162, in view of Section 53A, certainly the confession of the accused made to him by the accused is hit by Section 25 of the Evidence Act. But quite contrary view has been taken by the Honorable Supreme Court in very many number of judgments. I am going to tell you as to how this decision was taken by the Honorable Supreme Court. And as of now, having doubted the correctness of this, Honorable Justice A.K. Sikri, sitting with another Honorable Judge, has now referred the matter to a larger bench, and the matter is now pending before a larger bench. I will come to that little later. Now, let us move on to the negative phase of my lecture. How does this classification makes any difference? I am concerned for today's lecture about two provisions which I have already quoted to you. Section 25 of the Evidence Act and Section 162 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. If he is deemed to be, if he is a police officer, both the provisions will govern. If he is deemed to be a police officer, there also Section 162 and 25 of the Evidence Act will be applicable. If he is neither a police officer strictly nor a police officer deemed, and if such an officer is only an officer investigating the case, exercising the powers of the police or similar powers of the police, whether these two provisions are applicable or not. Now, let me first take the development of law so far as Section 25 is concerned, keeping in mind these classifications. There were a number of judgments. Let me lay my hand on one judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, which is somewhat the earliest judgment. Rajaram Jaiswal versus State Report in 1964 to SCR 752. That was a case under the Bihar and Orissa Excise Act 2 of 1915. A plea was taken that a confession made to an officer under the Act, namely this Excise Act, an officer under the Excise Department, is hit by Section 25 of the Evidence Act. This was very elaborately examined by the Honorable Supreme Court in this case in Rajaram Jaiswal case, and the Supreme Court, much influenced by this deeming clause, that is, an officer excise officer shall be deemed to be an officer in charge of a police station, deemed to be an officer in charge of a police station. The Honorable Supreme Court said that he is deemed to be a police officer. Therefore, there is no much of difference between a police officer and a deemed officer. And so, a confession made to him is barred or hit by Section 25 of the Evidence Act. 1964 to SCR, page 752. Please kindly note this judgment. Now, this was in 1964. In 1966, a constitutional bench examined the very same issue in respect of the Sea Customs Act. So, not the present Customs Act, Sea Customs Act, the old act, and the Land Customs Act. So, in that case, the question was whether the statement recorded by an officer from the accused which amounts to confession is admissible or not. This is Bodbujoti 7, Bodbujoti 7, reported in AIR 1966, page 1746. 1746. Now, without taking much of your time, let me straight away go to paragraph 5 and 6 of the judgment. Let me read it, please. Kindly bear with me because it is very interesting and it will take some time also. Section 5, paragraph 5. This leaves only the second question, and it has been argued on behalf of the appellant that the Central Excise Officer under the Central Excise Act and Salt Act of 1944 is a police officer within the meaning of those words in Section 25 of the Evidence Act. Therefore, even though the Deputy Superintendent of Customs and Central Excise may have acted under the powers conferred on him by the Sea Customs Act, he was still a police officer, and the statement made to him by the appellant on so and so date, which is in the nature of a confession, would be inadmissible under Section 25 of the Evidence Act. This was the argument before the Constitution Bench, because earlier there was some judgment. This Rajaram Jaiswal was also considered in the judgment. Now, they refer to Rajaram Jaiswal. Then let me move on to paragraph 6. I quote, there has been difference of opinion among the high courts in India as to the meaning of the words police officer used in Section 25 of the Evidence Act. One view has been that those words must be construed in a broad way, and all officers, whether they are police officers properly so called or not, would be police officers within the meaning of those words if they have all the powers of a police officer with respect to investigation of offences with which they are concerned. So a broad meaning should be given to the term police as stated in Section 25 of the Evidence Act. This is one view. Taking such a broad view, some of the court took the view that Section 25 does not cover only those officers who are strictly police officers, but those officers who enjoy the powers of the police officers also. You please kindly note, this judgment does not speak of a deemed police officer. It speaks of an officer who enjoys all the powers of a police officer. Whether those officers would also fall within the ambit of Section 25. Yes, it would fall. This is a broad view. There was also another view, which is a narrow view. The other view, which may be called the narrow view, is that the words police officer in Section 25 of the Evidence Act mean a police officer properly so called, and do not include officers of other departments of government who may be charged with the duty to investigate under the special acts, special crimes thereunder, like excise officers, offences, or customs offences, and so on. This was the narrow view. Now, the Constitution Bench was not prepared to give a verdict as to whether the broad meaning is to be given or narrow meaning is to be given to these words. That is found in paragraph 7. Prima facie, there is in our opinion much to be said for the narrow view taken by the Patna High Court. But as we have come to the conclusion that even on the broad view, a central excise officer under the Act is not a police officer, please underline, mark the rest of the portion. It is unnecessary to express a final opinion on the two views on the meaning of the words police officer in section 25 of the Evidence Act. So Constitution Bench did not go into the question as to whether these two words police officer as found in section 25 should receive a wider meaning or a narrow meaning. The Supreme Court, the Constitution Bench did not go into that. So why I am stressing more is that this part of the judgment, this observation of the judgment of the Constitution Bench has gone unnoticed by all the subsequent judgments. That is the purpose of my reading this part. Now, I quote further. We shall proceed on the assumption that the broad view may be accepted and that requires an examination of the various provisions of the Act to which we turn now. So the Honorable Supreme Court, without examining the question as to whether narrow meaning is to be given or broad meaning is to be given to these words, assumed that it requires only a broad view, and on that basis it proceeded further. So therefore, in all the subsequent judgments, the Supreme Court has taken the view that broad view should be given to section 25. Therefore, section 25 bar not only bars the confession made to a police officer strictly, but an officer who enjoys the powers of a police officer as well by giving a broad view or broad meaning to these words. That is what we could see in the judgment. Though in this judgment, the Constitutional Bench had not answered the question, it went on the assumption that broad view is to be given. I am going to cite some of the subsequent judgments wherein such broad view has been taken consistently by the Honorable Supreme Court. I am in full agreement, and I am also very happy to say that this broad view is still today accepted by the Honorable Supreme Court. And the restricted meaning, narrow meaning is not at all taken by the Honorable Supreme Court for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. I am happy about that. Now, then how in this judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court finally held that he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25. See, the question is whether they are police officers as defined in the Indian Police Act is not the question. For a limited purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act alone is the judgment, whether he is a police officer or not. Now, the provision upon which reliance was made by the Council was section 19 of the Act. I'm sorry, 21 of the Act. This was the 21. When any person is forwarded under section 19 to a central excise officer empowered to send persons who are arrested to a magistrate, the central excise officer shall proceed to inquire into the charge against him. You please kindly note. He does not proceed to investigate the case. The officer under this Act proceeds to inquire, not to investigate. This is one of the main tests laid out by the Honorable Supreme Court in this judgment. If they proceed to investigate, it's a different matter. Here, the officer proceeds only to inquire, not to investigate. And therefore, the statement made, he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. This is one input in the mind of the Honorable Supreme Court. Now, in paragraph 9, last 5 lines, all that section 21, which I just now read, provides is that for the purpose of this inquiry, just see here again, inquiry, a central excise officer have the powers of an officer in charge of a police station when investigating a cognizable case. But even so, it appears that these powers do not include the power to submit a charge sheet under section 173 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. For unlike the Bihar and Orissa Excise Act, the Central Excise Officer is not deemed to be an officer in charge of the police station. Therefore, Rajaram Jaiswal says, as under that act, an officer of that department is deemed to be a police officer. Therefore, section 25 is applicable. He is a police officer for the purpose of section 25. But here, he is not investigating. He is only holding inquiry, and he has not been empowered to file a final report under section 173(2) of the Code to the magistrate, enabling him to take cognizance of the offences. So the second test is whether a given officer is having the power to file a final report under section 173(2). If he does not have that power to file a police report, that is a final report under section 173(2), then he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. Here, mark my reservation about this finding of the Honorable Supreme Court. If he is empowered to file a final report, he will enjoy all the powers of a police officer, and he may be classified, he may be brought under the classification that he is a deemed police officer or a police officer exercising all the powers of a police officer, not similar powers. Here, he is enjoying all the powers of a police officer. As per his station, as per an officer in charge of a police station, whether such an officer, because he is not able to file a final report, can be kept outside the purview of section 25 of the Evidence Act, is a great question which still disturbs my mind. Section 25 should receive a broad meaning. We have to take a broad view. Having said that, how the Honorable Supreme Court can say that because he cannot file a final report under section 173(2), he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25. Section 25 plays a different role altogether. It is a very salutary provision protecting the human rights of the accused, which has got nothing to do with the filing of final report, which has got nothing to do with the way in which one person is going to be prosecuted. It is immaterial whether he is prosecuted by way of police report or by way of private complaint. It is material as to whether at the time when he gave the statement, namely a confession statement to the person, he was under the impression that he is a police officer, and whether for that limited purpose he is a police officer or not is the question. So this is the test. So one test is he is not investigating, he is only doing inquiry. Second test is he is not filing final report. Because he is not doing investigation, he is not filing final report. In a case where he does investigation, but till he is prevented from filing final report, then this question assumes importance. My answer to that question would be that till he will fall within the bar of section 25 of the Evidence Act. Now, going to para 10 of the judgment, we are of the opinion that mere conferment of powers of investigation into criminal offences under section 9 of the Act does not make the Central Excise Officer a police officer, even in the broader view mentioned above. Otherwise, any person entrusted with the investigation under section 202 of the Code of Criminal Procedure would become a police officer. Now, they go to section 9 immediately, and they say that he is doing investigation, but he cannot file a final report, and therefore he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25. So, in my view, it is the Honorable Supreme Court ought to have seen whether at the time when the statement was made by the accused to the officer, he had all the powers of a police officer, whether he could do all the mischiefs which a police officer could do for extracting a confession from a person. Why section 25 was introduced in the Evidence Act? What is the purpose? The purpose is to simply throw such a confession out of the consideration, because the normal presumption is that a police officer is capable of keeping a person under threat, coercion, and undue influence and get a statement. These things could be adopted by an officer of this department also. Therefore, whether such an officer can be kept out of the purview of Section 25 is still a question which remains to be answered. That is now pending. Now let me move on to a few more lines in paragraph 11. In any case, unlike the provisions of Section 78(3) of the Bihar and Orissa Excise Act, Section 21(2) of the Act does not say that the central excise officer shall be deemed to be an officer in charge of a police station. So, Rajaram Jaiswal, I want to recall to your memory, says that an officer, the excise officer under that act, is deemed to be a police officer. There, the Supreme Court said that the statement of the accused would fall under Section 25. No, here in the judgment, they distinguish. We do not find any such deeming provision in this act to say that these officers are also deemed to be police officers. Therefore, we say that he is not a police officer for the purpose of Section 25. I will say that, and the last one line, all that Section 21 does is to give him certain powers to aid him in his inquiry. So he is not doing investigation. He is holding only inquiry. While inquiring, he exercises similar powers of a police officer. This is a correct conclusion. But therefore, there are some observations which really disturb us. So this is the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court by a Constitutional Bench in AR 1966, Supreme Court page 1746, Badbu Jyoti 7th versus State. This judgment is the basic for all the subsequent judgments. Then came Ramesh Chandra Mehta, another Constitutional Bench. I am going to refer to you only for 4 judgments. I will conclude them. Ramesh Chandra Mehta, AIR 1969 Supreme Court, page 940. For young friends to note, Ramesh Chandra Mehta versus State, AIR 1969 Supreme Court, 940. This was again a case under Sea Customs Act and Import and Export Control Act. 2 arguments now. So earlier, in the Badbu Jyoti 7th case, the only issue was whether he is a police officer for the purpose of Section 25. Here in this case, again, 2 issues were raised. One is that he is a police officer. Same issue was again raised. The Honorable Supreme Court said, no, this has already been settled in Badbu Jyoti, and therefore you do not want to go into that. So this Constitutional Bench simply followed the early judgment and say that he is not a police officer for the purpose of Section 25. So Section 25 bar is not applicable. Okay. Please kindly note, there is no discussion about 162 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, about which I will say something later. Now, the second point raised in this case was that this statement recorded by this officer, though he is not a police officer, he is hit by the doctrine of testimonial compulsion as enshrined in Article 23 of the Constitution of India. So the accused, the man gives a confession, you are compelling him to make a statement, he makes a statement. You are not a police officer, therefore Section 25 is not applicable, but stay, because he is an accused person, this amounts to testimonial compulsion, therefore the statement is not admissible. This was the second point raised. But the Honorable Supreme Court held in this case that, that Agad case, referring to that was the earlier Constitutional Bench judgment. The Honorable Supreme Court again held in this case that at the time when the statement was made, he did not stand in the position of an accused. He was made an accused only later. And therefore, this bar under Article 23 is not applicable. See, the crucial issue is that at the time when the statement was made, whether he was an accused or not. You might have seen in these NDPS cases, they will come, make a search by following section 50, take out some contraband from the accused, but they won't arrest him. They will say, they will serve a summons immediately, asking him to come to the office for the purpose of interrogation. You just see the fallacy as to how it is done. So the person is found in possession of contraband worth several crores. It is seized from him after following the mandate of section 50 of the Act. Magazine is drawn, everything is done on the spot. It is also tested in the kit, found to be a contraband. Even then, they won't arrest because the officer has got no reason to arrest him at all. He won't arrest. What he does, he issues summons to him. Please come to my office. Then the accused will go. It is said that he goes voluntarily to the office. There in the office, he again makes a statement voluntarily that is reduced into writing. And as per section 67 of the NDPS Act. Thereafter only he is arrested. So it is argued, and the same has also been accepted, that at the time when the statement was made, he was not even an accused. There was no accusation against him. Therefore, this bar under Article 23 is not applicable. This we have been following in this country. In every case under the NDPS Act, if you look at, the officer of DRA will never arrest the accused on the spot as soon as the contraband is seized. He will ask him to come there. He will serve summons, he will go, and he will, even after this incident, after having gone to the office, he will voluntarily make a confession. Therefore, it will be relevant because there was no coercion, threat, or promise as per section 24 of the Evidence Act. Section 24, you know very well, says that no confession made out of threat, coercion, or undue influence is irrelevant. It is negative in form. But we hold that this confession, which is made before his arrest, is still admissible and it is still voluntary also. We are holding that. So in this case, in this Ramesh Chandra Mehta, the Honorable Supreme Court held that for the purpose of applying the bar under Article 23, at the time when the statement was made, he should have been an accused in the case. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court said that when an FIR is registered against an individual, he is an accused, and therefore any statement made subsequently will fall under the mischief of section 25. Or in other cases where prosecution can be launched only on a private complaint, he becomes an accused the moment a private complaint is laid before the jurisdictional court. Until then, he is not an accused. Until then, there is no accusation. And therefore, any statement made before such a private complaint is filed is not hit by section 25. Is not hit by Article 23 of the Constitution of India. This is the view taken in the judgment, and I think that the time is up anyhow. I will read only few lines. I thought that I could read, but for want of time, I think that I can skip this also. Paragraph 4 of the judgment states about the argument advanced. This is the argument. But the admissibility of statements recorded by a customs officer under section 171A of the Sea Customs Act of 1878 depends upon the determination of the question whether the statements when made were inadmissible under section 25 of the Evidence Act and Article 23 of the Constitution of India. This was the question raised, and in paragraph 10 and 11, it is answered also, and more precisely it is said. But in order that the guarantee against the testimonial compulsion incorporated in Article 23 may be claimed by a person, it has to be established that when he made the statement sought to be tendered in evidence against him, he was a person accused of an offense. This was the finding given by the Honorable Supreme Court in this case. So saying, the Honorable Supreme Court negatived both the arguments, rejected both the arguments. So far as the this view was taken following the earlier constitutional judgment in Katika Lahar judgment reported in 1962 3 SCR page 10. 1962. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. Katika Lahar 1953. Sorry. 1953. I'm sorry. 1953 SCR page 730. So this was the view taken in this constitutional bench. Okay. Now, what was the development made thereafter? So I go refer to 1964, then 66, then 69. Now I move on to 70. The judgment was delivered in this case. Judgment was delivered in 69, but it was reported in 1970. This is AIR 1970 Supreme Court, page 1065. Ilias versus Collector of Customs. Again, a constitutional bench. Similar issues were raised. This case was to be decided by a constitutional bench again because this case was under the new act, the Central Excise and Customs Act. Both the acts. So the old act, Sea Customs and the Land Customs Act were all repealed, and new act. Therefore, again reiterated the same point here in this case also in paragraph 15. I read a few lines. Learned counsel for the appellant, when faced with the above difficulty, has gone to the extent of suggesting that by necessary implication, the power to file charge sheet flows from some of the powers which have already been discussed under the new act, and that a customs officer is entitled to exercise even this power. So the argument was under the new act, Customs Act, there is nothing to indicate that an officer of the customs cannot file a police report, final report under section 173(2). The argument was he has got all the powers of the police officer, including power to file a final report. Therefore, the earlier judgments commencing from Badgu, Jyoti, Savan are not applicable. This was the argument. The Honorable Supreme Court went into this and it said that we do not find any difference in that. It is this answer, it is difficult, and indeed it would be contrary to all rules of interpretation to spell out any such special power from any of the provisions contained in the new act. In this view of the matter, even though under the new act a customs officer has been invested with many powers which are not to be found in the provisions of the old act, he cannot be regarded as a police officer within the meaning of section 25 of the Evidence Act. So again, the Honorable Supreme Court said that he is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. This is 1970. In the meanwhile, not in the meanwhile, immediately thereafter, in 1980, another case came up before the Honorable Supreme Court. That is Balkishan versus State of Maharashtra. 1980, 4 SCC, page 600. Page 600. So, Madam, can I take another 10 minutes? Hello.
So you can continue. I think ma'am is not able to hear the audio correct.
Okay, no
Yes,
problem. Okay. So I'm going to cite only two more judgments. I'm going to conclude, please. Okay. So this 1984 SCC page 600 This was a case under the Railway Properties Unlawful Possession Act, which I have read to you the relevant provisions. In this case, the question again arose whether such an officer is a police officer or not. While referring to the provisions, I pointed out to you, I wanted you to keep in your mind that on receiving the information, the officer shall proceed to inquire and not to investigate. This I wanted you to mark. Now, that is taken note of by this Honorable Supreme Court. This is by a two-judge bench, of course. Here, paragraph 14, as explained by this court in aerial state versus state, the policy behind section 25 and 26. Please kindly take note. I got that aerial versus state also. That is reported in 1954 Supreme Court, page 15. Since it is extracted here, I do not want to read that. Policy behind section 55, we are coming to the crucial aspect of the matter. When you are interpreting section 25, when there is no definition of a police officer or police anywhere in the Evidence Act, how you have to interpret, how you have to understand. In my personal view, such understanding or such interpretation used to be based on the purpose of section 25. What is the mischief that it wants to remedy? That has been explained in this 1954 Supreme Court judgment that is extracted in this 1980. It says, I quote, as explained by this court in Aerial versus State, the policy behind section 25 and 26 of the Evidence Act is to make a substantive rule of law that confessions whenever and wherever made to the police shall be presumed to have been obtained under the circumstances mentioned in section 24 and therefore inadmissible, except so far as is provided in section 27 of that act. The term police officer has not been defined in the Evidence Act. Having taken note of the fact that the Evidence Act has not defined these words, the police and police officer, the Honorable Supreme Court took a right view in my perception as to what is the purpose that is to be taken into account. The purpose is that to make a substantive rule of law that confessions whenever and wherever made to a police officer shall be presumed to have been obtained under the circumstances mentioned in section 24. Section 24 speaks of irrelevancy of a confession which is obtained by threat, coercion, or undue influence. So police people are capable of exerting these. Therefore, the lawmakers were not prepared to believe that there are some good police officers. We are not blaming the entire police officer. But the lawmaker was not prepared to accept that there may be some good police officer who may not influence, who may not coerce, who may not cause any threat. But even then, the lawmaker said, no, we are not prepared to give any such allowance. We are not prepared to take any such risk at all in this issue. Therefore, we keep the confession out of consideration for any purpose. That was a policy of law in public interest. That was the policy of the lawmaker that we have been adopting till today with no amendment made to section 25 by the parliament. Now, having regard to this public policy in mind, how in the judgment the Honorable Supreme Court has examined the issue as to whether the officer under the RPP Act, that is Railway Protection, Railway Properties Unlawful Possession Act, is a police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. Paragraph 34 of the judgment I quote. The third material aspect in which an inquiry under section 1966 Act differs from investigation under the code is to be found in section 9(3), whereunder persons summoned to appear in the inquiry are expressly mandated to state the truth. Now, you please kindly see here, they distinguish between these two. One, inquiry and investigation. He is not doing any investigation, he is doing only inquiry. Therefore, the person summoned under section 9 of that act, he is bound to make a true statement. This you can find even in section 161 of the code, which says that a person having knowledge of the crime shall make a true statement. That is subject matter in Nandini Satpathi's case. So no time, I do not want to go into those aspects. Now, the inquiry under, I am reading again section 34, sorry, paragraph 34. The inquiry under section 8(1) of the 1966 Act, in view of section 9(4), shall be deemed to be a judicial proceeding for the purpose of section 193 and 228 of the Penal Code. But a police investigation under section 160 of the Code does not partake of the character of a judicial proceeding for any purpose, and a witness examined during such investigation cannot be prosecuted under section 193 of the Code. So there was yet another provision which was noticed by the Honorable Supreme Court, that during the course of inquiry, not investigation, a person summoned is bound to make a true statement. If he makes a false statement, then he is liable for prosecution. Whereas during the course of investigation, if any such statement is found to be false later on, he cannot be prosecuted at all, because no signature is obtained. It is it is not a judicial proceeding. So for these two reasons, namely, it is a judicial proceeding. Number two, it is only an inquiry and not investigation. The Supreme Court took the view that an officer of the Railway Protection Force is not a police officer for the purpose of section 25. So it is found in section paragraph 39. From the comparative study of the relevant provisions of the Act and the Code, it is abundantly clear that an officer of RPF making an inquiry under section 8(1) of the Act does not possess several important attributes of an officer in charge of a police station conducting an investigation under chapter 12 of the Code. The character of the inquiry is different from that of an investigation under the Code. The official status and powers of the officer of the force in the matter of inquiry under the Act differ in material aspect from those of a police officer conducting an investigation under the Code. So they highlight very rightly the difference between inquiry and investigation. If it is an investigation, in my perception, going by this judgment, the statement, the officer is a police officer, not for every purpose, but for the limited purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. This judgment, in my view, is a standing testimony to my view. Now, having said all these things, under the Narcotics Act, you know, there are the Kanyala, there are so many judgments. Now, under the Narcotics Act, whether the officer appointed under section 53 is a police officer for the purpose of section 25, though there are judgments to the effect that they are not police officers, the division bench of Honorable Justice A.K. Sikri has doubted the correctness of the same, because it was argued before the division, the two-judge bench, that here under the Narcotics Act, the officer enjoys all the powers of a police officer, number one. Number two, the proceeding before him is not deemed to be a judicial proceeding. Number two. The third test is, as per the preamble to the Police Act, if a force is constituted for the purpose of prevention and detection of crime, it has got all the attributes of a police, and therefore he is a police officer. Here, the purpose of the Narcotic Drugs Act is only to detect the crime, prevent the crime, and detect the crime involving the Narcotics Act. There is no other purpose. Whereas under the Customs Act, under the Central Excise Act, under the Railway Protection Act, the purpose of the Act is not to prevent the crime or to detect the crime. This is the main issue. In those acts, the purpose of constituting a force is for different purpose, like to detect the evasion of customs duty, central excise duty, or to detect the possession of railway property. These forces have not been constituted for the purpose of deduction and investigation and prosecution. That's the reason why CBI is a police officer, an officer under in my view, the Money Laundering Act, who enjoys all the powers of a police officer, having the attributes of the police, must also be considered to be a police officer. But the law is not so clear on these aspects. Now, to support my point, I want to go to a little into the area of interpretation.
So
Now,
questions
this
from,
act is a penal act.
so we have some questions from the viewers.
Ma?
There are some questions from the viewers, sir.
And I'm closing. 2 minutes now. Please kindly give me 2 minutes. I'm closing.
Yes.
So I'm going to this issue. Now, this being a penal statute, then we have to see as to what is the natural meaning of the word police officer. So, at the time when a statement is recorded by an officer of DRI, or for that purpose PMLA, under the authority of the PMLA Act, what is the impression of the people? Whether they treat them, giving the technical meaning to that, to the word, and say that they are not police officers. So they should receive the natural meaning. For that, I am citing 2 judgments for your kind consideration. Just please make note of that. And with that, I close. This is 1972 to Supreme Court 246 and AIR 1961 Supreme Court page 1325. The point which I want to make out from these judgments is that the term police or police officer have not been defined in the Evidence Act. Then what is the meaning to be given to that for the purpose of section 25? It should be the understanding of a common man. It should receive the natural meaning. What is the natural meaning? You go and ask any person on the street as to whether this narcotic officer is a police officer. He will say, yes, he is a police officer. That is a perception. So, common man's understanding, common man's perception should be given to interpret the term police officer for the purpose of section 25 of the Evidence Act. Therefore, to conclude, I would say that what remains as of now is the situation is so fluid and we are waiting for a judgment from a larger bench of the Honorable Supreme Court in the narcotic case. If it comes out, then we believe that these confusions will be set at rest to some extent. With this, I conclude. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir. Abhimanyu, there are some questions. Can you please ask those questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So the first question that we have is with reference to the Serious Frauds Investigation Office. This is constituted under the Companies Act.
Yes.
And they have powers to investigate. And when they conduct an investigation, no other investigative agency can conduct their own investigations. And
Yes.
Section 212 of the Act itself also states that they shall have the power of an inspector. They also have a power to arrest. So
Yes.
can they be treated as police officers despite the fact that they are bureaucrats in reality?
Yes, yes. See, I'm not very familiar with that, but anyhow,
Yes.
I have told you what are the tests. So similar powers is something different from exact police powers. So I have shown you the provisions of the Railway Protection Unlawful Possession Act.
Yes, sir.
There, they have been given power to arrest, power to search, power to entry, power of entry. All these things are there. They are similar powers, but they do not enjoy the powers of a police officer. So we have to look at the particular provision as to whether it empowers or vests all the powers of a police officer on that particular officer. That we have to see. And other tests are, I already told you what are the tests which have been evolved by the Honorable Supreme Court in various judgments.
Yes, sir.
Please apply that.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure of that because I'm not very familiar with that act.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Yes, please.
So another question that we've received during the session is seeking your general views on the penal powers of the police officers for violations under the Disaster Management Act, as well as Essential Commodities Act.
Yes,
During the current lockdown, these acts are very much in vogue. So,
yes.
yes, sir.
Sure, what do you want? What's the question?
So the question is, what is the scope of the police's penal powers under the Disaster Management Act and the Essential Commodities Act?
No, under the Essential Commodities Act, there are to be control orders issued by the state government.
Yes, sir.
There are control orders like rice, paddy and rice and dal, etc., oil. For everything, there are control orders. If there is any violation,
Yes,
the
sir.
police officer is empowered to register a case, investigate, and file a final report.
All right,
The
sir.
police officer has absolute power because he enjoys all the powers under the code.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And it is immaterial whether it is during the lockdown period or during ordinary period.
Yes, sir.
They enjoy the same power.
Yes, sir.
So far as the matter of investigation is concerned. Yes, please.
So the last question that we have is another general question with reference to cyber crimes. With everyone shifting to digital space, and there being a constitution of cyber cells in our country,
Yes.
could you elaborate a bit on the scope of investigation and powers of police officers to investigate on cyber crime?
You please give me an hour's time.
Yes,
Then
sir.
I will explain everything. It's too difficult, you know.
Yes, sir.
About the various
So
information.
we should actually conduct a special session with you on that, sir.
So I already spoken on regarding the admissibility of electronic evidence.
Yes, sir.
Regarding section 65A and 65B of the Evidence Act. I
Yes,
already given a lecture. It is also available in YouTube.
Yes,
If
sir.
you want me to go to the cyber crimes and I go to concentrate in the, first of all, in the Information Technology Act, then I go to say all these things. And
Yes,
it may not be possible within a few minutes now.
Yes, sir.
Be very sorry.
That's all right. So we'll share the link with our viewers.
I am sorry I have taken much of your time already.
No. So thank you very much for this enriching lecture. It was really professionally very, very enriching. And we will be broadcasting this lecture on our Facebook and Facebook channel and also on the YouTube channel. And so thank you very much for this session. And I'm quite sure everybody must have really enjoyed the session and must have really learned a lot from the session, though this is a subject which